Hi, Katzcradul here. Today I am canning up more of my garden's bounty. As I have mentioned before, yellow squash is one of my favorite vegetables. Just so happens that it comes in season the same time as tomatoes and okra, so I'm usually very busy this time of year. The good news is I planted my okra a little late, so I'm a few weeks away from having to deal with that, which is a good thing because the squash and tomatoes are keeping me pretty busy. My favorite yellow squash is the kind I grew up with, which is yellow crookneck, which is slightly more golden colored than this squash. This is yellow straight neck squash, and it probably actually is better for canning because you get more uniform slices. When I slice up the little yellow crookneck squash, you get some little small rings and some little big rings, but you're going to see that these are a little more uniform. This is just how they came out of the garden. I have not washed them. With the Back to Eden method of gardening, my produce seldom needs anything but just a very quick rinse. There's never any mud or dirt because, of course, the thick layer of mulch keeps any of that from splashing up on my vegetables, so they come out of the garden looking gorgeous. Here I have them all sliced up, about 1/4 inch slices. I like them not any more mature than this, because if they do get more mature, then the seeds get bigger, and when you can them, then the seeds are all floating around in the jar, and I don't like that. As you'll see, I ended up with a big bowl of squash here, but what I want to draw your attention to now is the tomato soup you see to the left there. I had 7 full quarts of soup, but then ended up with a little bit of soup left in the pot that wouldn't fit. I mean, it would be too little to put in a quart jar, but luckily I had a little pint jar that was hot and ready to go, and I put the remaining soup in that little pint jar. And that is a good thing to do, is if you're canning quarts, to heat up a couple little pints too, in case you have any left over that won't necessarily fit into the quart, then you still can go ahead and can them and put it in a pint. So I always do that. Here I want you to see some of the things I always lay out and get ready when I start a canning session. Since today I am canning squash, I will need to add salt to those jars just because I like that in my vegetables. You can certainly leave it out if you don't want to. I always have salt and a measuring spoon there. I have the little tool to the left which actually gets any bubbles out, and you need to use that if you're canning fruit or vegetables, because bubbles will get trapped in your jar and you want to be sure to get those out. There's a little magnetic lid lifter there. There's also a funnel which helps me to get my food in the jars, and there is a jar lifter which allows me to put the jars into the pressure canner and take them out without getting burned. I always use canning or pickling salt in my vegetables, in my canned vegetables. You could use regular table salt, but it may make your product cloudy. This pickling salt has no stabilizers or fillers in it, and it will allow your canned vegetables to be very clear. It lasts a very long time. You can see I bought this 610. That's what B610 means. But it'll last for years and years, so I've got lots of bags of it on my shelf. Then here I'm ready to can. I have drained the water off my squash, and this is an excellent pot. This is a pasta pot, and it's wonderful for blanching vegetables. With squash, I do not want to cook them through. All I want to do is get them hot. Once they're hot, I take 3 hot jars out of my oven, and I put the funnel in my first jar, and I begin filling it with my hot squash. I fill the squash up to that first ring at the top of the jar. That will give you a 1-inch headspace. I don't pack the squash in the jar, but I do shake it to help it settle a little bit. And once the jar is filled, then I wipe the rim with a damp paper towel, and I put a lid and a ring on it, screwing them down tightly, and then I put that jar into my pressure canner while I'm filling the other jars. Now, one of the things I like to have handy is a plate, because a little small plate to hold my funnel and the jar I'm dipping my squash out with, because once I've filled that third jar, then I have to have a place to put that funnel and that spoon while I go into the oven and get another 3 jars. So here's a little plate I use. Yeah, you could lay it on the counter, you could lay it on the towel, but I really like to keep things absolutely as sanitary as I possibly can, so a plate is the best is the best thing to use in my opinion. So I get out the next 3 jars and begin filling them as well until they're all done. My canner will hold 7 quart jars. Once I get them in there, if the water level is not quite as high as it needs to be, I simply use the water that's already hot that I had the lids and the rings heating in. That's a perfect use for that. You'll see another little jar in there. I had a little pint jar of spaghetti sauce that did not get processed one night because I didn't have enough room, so I just let it come to room temperature and then added it in there. It doesn't need to process quite as long as the squash, but it's not going to hurt it, so I always try to go with a full canner. Here's Cook's treat. There were just a few little squash left over, and so I put a little butter and salt and pepper on those, and that became my lunch, and it was very tasty. The squash came out just beautiful. I'll put the instructions below for you so that you'll know how to do it. I don't usually like vegetables cooked this tender. However, one of our favorite things is my squash casserole, and you can go check out that video. I posted it a few days ago. And so tender squash like this that will mash up easily with a fork are perfect for that casserole. So I love canning them. A lot of people will tell you can't can squash because it packs down too much. That's not true to me. This jar is really loose. The vegetables float around in there. I'm packing them hot already, so I know in the pressure canner they get plenty hot. But you won't find a lot of instructions for packing squash. But I have done it safely for years. It's beautiful on my shelf and is tasty in the winter when I don't have any fresh squash. So I don't see any problem. You use your own discretion and you decide whether it's safe for you. I just don't think there's a problem. If I were to mash up the squash and then try to pack it in the jar, I might have some concerns. But these jars of squash are really loose and the squash float around in there, so I know it got enough heat when it was processed. I hope you'll give it a try, both growing summer squash and trying to can it. And if you haven't tried my squash casserole, please check that out as well. It is really yummy, and I just love this yellow squash. That's all for now. Cat's Cradle.